It was supposed to be just another day on the job. The sun came up over the construction site like it always did. The crew showed up, grabbed their coffee, and started their shift. But in less than 3 seconds, everything changed. A single cable snapped. Not because it was old or worn out, but because someone made one wrong decision. And that decision turned a routine lift into a disaster that killed 19 men in an instant. No one saw it coming. No one had time to run. By the end of the day, families were getting phone calls that would shatter their lives forever. This is the story of what happened that morning, why it happened, and the lessons that came way too late. The project was massive. A new office tower going up in the heart of the city, 42 stories of steel and concrete that was supposed to change the skyline. The company running the job, Meridian Construction, had a reputation. They finished projects fast, they came in under budget, and they had never had a serious accident. That track record mattered. It meant repeat contracts. It meant the company could charge premium prices. It meant the owners and executives could sleep at night. But there was a cost to that reputation that nobody wanted to talk about. The morning started like most mornings on a big job. The sun wasn't even fully up when the crew arrived. There were welders, bolt-up crews, ironworkers, and laborers scattered across the site. The crane operator, a guy named Marcus Webb, had been doing this for 17 years. He knew his equipment. He knew the signs of trouble. He had probably lifted 100,000 loads without incident. Marcus was the kind of operator other crews wanted on their site. He was careful. He paid attention. He followed the rules. That's what made what happened next so hard to understand. The morning briefing happened at 7:30. The foreman, a man named David Chen, stood in front of the crew with the day's schedule. They had to get the vertical supports for the 38th floor in place by noon. That was ambitious, but not impossible. The weather forecast was clear. No wind warnings. The equipment had been inspected 2 days before. Everything was in order. Everything was ready. Or so they thought. The problem started with a decision that seemed small at the time. Normally, the main hoisting cable for the heavy lift crane was supposed to be replaced every 18 months. It was a rule that had been in the safety manual since 1998. The cable on the crane at this site had been installed 19 months earlier. Technically, it was due for replacement, but the replacement cable was backordered. It wouldn't arrive for another 3 weeks. Management made the call. Keep using the existing cable. It's only a month over schedule. The cable still looks good. The tests come back clean. We can't afford the delay. That's how that decision was made. Not maliciously, not with the intent to hurt anyone. Just a calculation, a judgment call, a choice that thousands of construction companies make every single day. Nobody expected it to matter. By 10 o'clock that morning, the crew was in full swing. 3 lifts had already been completed without incident. Marcus Webb was in his crane cab 60 feet above the ground, moving with the kind of precision that comes from years of doing something right. The next load was big. 2 massive steel support beams lashed together, weighing a combined 23 tons. They were going to be positioned on the 38th floor, a critical piece of the structural skeleton that would support everything above it. Marcus did his pre-lift checklist. He checked the cable, he checked the hook, he checked the spreader bar. Everything looked fine. He didn't have any reason to suspect that anything was wrong. The cable that he trusted with his life, and with the lives of 19 men below, was about to fail. But there were no signs, no fraying, no visible damage, no red flags that would have told him to stop. The lift began normally. The cable tightened. The beams rose smoothly off the ground. Workers below held the tag lines, keeping the load steady as it climbed toward the 38th floor. Marcus could see everything from his cab. He could see the rigging crew on the floor above, waiting to receive the beams. He could see the safety officer standing at his post. He could see the men below guiding the load upward. Everything was textbook. Everything was correct. And then, at 140 feet in the air, something gave way. The cable didn't fray slowly. It didn't unwind gradually. It snapped suddenly, violently, like a whip cracking across the site. The 2 support beams dropped like stones. They fell past the 37th floor. They fell past the 36th. They fell with a roar that echoed across the entire construction site. Workers below looked up and froze. Some tried to run. Some tried to dive out of the way, but there was nowhere to go. The beams came down in the rigging yard, where the crew was preparing the next load for the lift. 19 men were in that yard. 19 men who had done nothing wrong, who had followed every rule, who had shown up that morning, expecting to go home at 5 o'clock and kiss their kids goodnight. The impact was catastrophic. The first beam hit a welder named Roberto Sanchez. Roberto was 34 years old. He had 3 kids at home and a wife who worked as a nurse. The beam crushed him. The second beam hit a cluster of workers who had been standing near the material prep station. There was no mercy in the impact, no chance for anyone to escape. The men simply ceased to exist. They were there one moment, talking and working and living. They were gone the next. When the dust settled, there were 19 bodies. Marcus Webb watched it happen from his crane cab. He saw the cable snap, he saw the load fall, he saw the impact, and he understood immediately what had happened. The cable he had trusted had failed, the cable that passed all the inspections, the cable that was only a month past its scheduled replacement date, the cable that management had decided to keep in service because a new one hadn't arrived yet. Marcus didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the scene below. The emergency response was immediate and chaotic. Ambulances screamed into the site. Police cars blocked off the area. Fire crews moved through the wreckage looking for survivors. Knowing before they even started that there wouldn't be any, families started getting phone calls. Some got the news from bosses, some heard it on the radio or saw it on the news before anyone official told them. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the story was on every local news station. By evening, it was national news. The investigation began almost immediately. Federal inspectors came to the site. They took the broken cable and sent it to a laboratory. They interviewed Marcus Webb for hours. They looked at the safety records, they looked at the maintenance logs, and slowly, a picture emerged. The cable should have been replaced. The company knew it was overdue. The manual specifically said 18 months. It was 19 months old. That 1 month, that single month that came from a business decision made in a conference room somewhere, had killed 19 men. The lab report on the cable was damning. The steel had developed microscopic fractures over time. The metal was under stress from 17 years of use and 17 million cycles of lifting and lowering. Those fractures were invisible to the naked eye. You couldn't see them during a routine inspection. But they were there, growing slowly, waiting for the right moment to propagate and fail. The cable would probably have lasted another 3 or 4 months if the load distribution had been different. It would have lasted another year if the company had used it more conservatively. But it didn't have 3 or 4 months. It didn't have another year. It had all the time up to the moment when Marcus Webb pulled the load off the ground that morning. The families of the dead men sued. Meridian Construction fought the lawsuit for 5 years. They argued that the cable failure was unforeseeable. They argued that the company was not negligent. They hired expert witnesses who testified that the overdue replacement schedule was not a violation of industry standards. But the evidence was too clear. The internal memos showing the decision to keep the cable in service, despite it being overdue, were introduced into evidence. The safety manual, written in clear language, was read aloud in court. A jury deliberated for 3 days and came back with a verdict that awarded the families over $400 million. Meridian Construction went bankrupt, not because of the judgment itself, but because of what came after. Contracts were canceled. Other companies refused to work with them. Their reputation, the thing they had built so carefully by finishing projects on time and on budget, was destroyed. Marcus Webb never operated a crane again. He couldn't get past what he had seen. Some nights he still wakes up thinking he hears that cable snap. The story might have ended there. Just another tragedy in the construction industry. Just another cautionary tale that safety managers show in training videos. But something changed after that day. The cable replacement schedule in the industry was reevaluated. What had been suggested as a guideline became a hard rule. Companies that violated it faced fines. Inspectors began conducting random cable testing instead of relying on visual inspection. Equipment manufacturers started developing cables that could send alerts when they developed critical fractures, letting operators know before catastrophic failure was possible. And construction crews started talking about what happened. Not to be depressing, not to be morbid, but to remember, to keep the 19 names alive. Roberto Sanchez, Marcus Kim, James Patterson, Diana Ortiz, and 15 others. 19 people who made a single day different from every other day. 19 people whose families had to find a way to carry on. 19 people whose names should have been kept alive, not erased from history by a single business decision made in a boardroom. The cable that snapped came back from the lab and was cut into sections. Each section was labeled and stored. Some of those sections are now part of construction safety training programs around the country. Workers look at the fractures in the metal. They see where the failure started. They understand in their bones what happens when someone chooses convenience over safety. They see the physical evidence of what one mistake costs. Today, when a crane operator does their pre-lift checklist, they're not just going through motions. They're thinking about Marcus Webb. They're thinking about the day the cable snapped. They're thinking about families that lost everything, and they take just a little bit more time. They look just a little bit closer. They ask one more question before they lift. That's how the 19 men who died that morning continue to save lives today. Not through regulations or lawsuits or investigations, but through the awareness that lives hang on details. Lives hang on decisions made by people who show up for work and do their job right. Lives hang on caring enough to ask whether something is safe enough, even when it seems fine, even when the pressure is on to move faster, even when it would be easier to just follow the schedule and trust that nothing will go wrong. The 19 men who died that morning didn't have to die. They died because someone in a position of authority made a choice. They died because a cable was kept in service 1 month too long. They died because people who should have said no didn't say no. They died because the system was broken in a way that nobody noticed until it was too late. But their deaths changed something. Not everything. Not as much as it should have. But something. And that's how we honor them. We remember their names. We tell their story. We make sure that the next person who sits in a foreman S chair or a manager S office understands that safety is on something you negotiate. It's not something you calculate as a line item in a budget. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. Because 19 families found out the hard way what happens when you get that wrong. And the construction industry is still trying to make sure it never happens again.